So as we discussed the agricultural residues, there are also other chemicals that do create poisoning in human when they are consumed in excessive amounts. So we'll discuss some of the very relevant and important chemicals that create poisoning in humans. So the most predominant one are the toxic metals. They are a major source of chemical poisoning in human beings through food. They come from different sources. For example, they might come from water that has been contaminated. And this is a serious case in Pakistan because mostly the water from the industries are not treated before they are released into the environment. So that creates a lot of burden on the environment because the environment gets polluted with most of the heavy metals. And from there it gets into soil, and from the soils it might get into the vegetation. Similarly, when this water is used for washing of different fruits and vegetables, this water might contaminate those fruits and vegetables. And if we leave some of the soil attached to these fruits and vegetables at the end, even that can cause the higher concentration of these toxic metals because they are there in the water and in the soils. And this is not the only source. They might come from other sources. For example, water pipes from which lead components might get into your food constantly in minor quantities but consistently. Many equipments and many containers, they might also be source of many metals. For example, our cooking utensils, if they are not food grade, they might be leaching a lot of metals inside your food on a daily basis and creating a lot of higher concentration in case of your food, and then eventually having the toxic effect on humans when the food are consumed. We discussed this lead. Lead, it comes from different sources. It might come from storage tanks as well. So when we actually have to have these different vessels, equipments, container within food for food preparation or storage, they must be all food grade. When they are not food grade, then there are chances that the metals might leach. For example, lead might get into your food from the storage tanks as well, from pipes as well. And soap water, which is more susceptible because it would be dissolving most of these metals. Another major source is the soldering that we do for in case of canning, as well as for other containers. For example, many of your milk containing containers, they are soldered when we do weld different metals together. So this soldering are done by different chemical compounds that release these toxic metals into your food as well. So a lot of care has to be taken that all the welding that is done to these containers which are involved with food transportation, storage or distribution, they should not be leaching these metals into your food. Although there are a lot of regulations that define the maximum residual amount of these metals inside your food, and there are a lot of regulatory practices that actually look into these matters, but in spite of these things, we still have got higher amounts of these metals getting into our food system. If we talk about lead, the poisoning of lead is not very common, so we don't see a lot number of deaths due to these lead poisoning incidents. But it doesn't mean that it's not dangerous. The dangers are gradually, they are higher, but they are not that visible. For example, we don't see major deaths coming out of this poisoning. But in case of kids who have got their body weight is not as much as adults, so they are more at risk for the lead poisoning. So if they are consumed lead for a longer time, they might develop this condition, chronic lead poisoning. In case of chronic lead poisoning, they might show different symptoms. For example, anemia is one symptom that is due to the chronic lead poisoning. Poor IQ performance, especially for kids who don't show much intelligence, it is possible that they might be having this chronic lead poisoning. And another issue, that is the poor attention span. The kids, they are exposed to the lead levels, they might not be able to show attention to their studies or any other activity that they are doing for a longer time. So they quickly, they might have some irritable behavior, or they may not be able to concentrate well on their subjects or activities. So that might affect our nations economically, or in case of developments as well, for the kids and the learning activities. Normally these leads, they come from daily food intake. Another source is the exhaust fumes that are generated by the vehicles during transportations. They are also containing lead, because this lead might be added as an anti-knocking factor in our petrol. And this pollution, or this smoke from these vehicles coming into the atmosphere, that goes back into the soil and water, and especially kids who are there in the congested city, they're more transportation, they are more susceptible to this kind of poisoning, because there are more smoke pollution in those cities. Another example is mercury. This is also common in many of the food grains when they are treated with antifungal compound having mercury. So mercury is getting into these grains and then ultimately into products. A lot of industrial operations release mercury into the environment, especially when their effluent or wastewater is not treated before leaving that into the environment. Again, seafood is another source also for alkyl mercury compounds, especially fish. So in many areas, the fish might be heavily contaminated with the mercury compounds. The mercury may also come from animal feed, and then that may get into your milk as well, milk and meat. If we talk about the poisoning of mercury, the damage that it causes damage to the central nervous system. And children are more sensitive to exposure, as I earlier said, because they don't have the body weight comparatively is not that higher as compared to adults, so they are more exposed to the concentration of these metals. Arsenic is another compound which is heavily distributed, especially in Pakistan, in Punjab particularly, in our groundwater because of this industrial pollution, again I would say. And it also comes from the water that is used in the processing, as well as from equipments and machinery that is used for processing. It is very important that this arsenic level are tested and they are reduced to a level where they are not serious, because arsenic is a carcinogenic compound. That means it can cause cancer when it is regularly consumed. Sodium phosphate is used as a stabilizer in milk. There has been an incidence in Japan where 12,000 people died, especially infants, due to this incidence, because the sodium phosphate that is used as a milk additive, that was contaminated with arsenic trioxide. So increasing the level of arsenic in the final product, that led to death of around 12,000 infants in Japan. That was a serious incidence. Another metal is cadmium. Cadmium poisoning have got different sources. It might come from water, it might come from processing industry, and zinc plating, where it is done to different equipments for storage. They also can lead to the cadmium level, higher cadmium level. So summarizing all this, lead, mercury, arsenic, cadmium, they are serious metals. They are all bivalent in nature. And I would like to highlight here that these bivalent metals, they are more serious in cases when we don't have proper nutrition. Because if we don't have the bivalent molecules in our feed, especially calcium and iron, which are very important nutrients, these are bivalent, by the way. So these bivalent molecules, if they are not found in your food and as a regular intake, then your central nervous system might uptake these heavy metals like lead, mercury, arsenic, and cadmium. And then once it gets into the central nervous system, it also can get into the kidneys as well as bone marrows, relating to a lot of diseases and serious problems. So this is about the general harmful effects of some of the metals, which are serious environmental toxins that get into your food and that might have serious health concerns.